Hello again, everyone. I'm Dr. George Simon, and welcome to another edition of the new Character Matters program, the program where we talk about what I consider to be the defining issue of our time, the character crisis that we face and that we have faced for some time now, and that affects every aspect of our lives. And today we're going to be continuing a discussion and wrapping it up on what I have called in my upcoming book, the fifth commandment of good character, that being attaining mastery over our appetites and aversions, not letting our appetites and our aversions run our lives, but rather learning to approach the things that we would rather avoid or refrain from the things that seem all too tempting and appealing when we need to, which is the job of a mature conscience. And so I'm going to be talking about that today as we wrap up our discussion on this particular commandment. Because these days, in our character-impaired times, unfortunately, there are too many of us that struggle with consciences that are undeveloped, relatively speaking. And there are those extreme cases, unfortunately, those extreme character disturbances where conscience is more than underdeveloped, but rather is absent altogether, where people do things without compunction that most of us wouldn't even dream of doing, because there's nothing to prevent them from doing that. So we need to have a little discussion about conscience, how it's formed, why these days so many folks are having trouble forming a mature, well-constructed conscience that helps them better avoid those circumstances that are tempting but spell disaster for your own emotional, mental, psychological, and character health, and a conscience that also pushes you to bear with those uncomfortable things that will grow you emotionally, mentally, psychologically, character-wise, even spiritually, if you'll allow the painful circumstances to instruct you, to inform you. But you have to be willing. You have to find room in your heart for bearing the uncomfortable and avoiding the appealing sometimes. That's what a good, mature, solid conscience can do for you. And these days it's harder than ever for a variety of reasons to form such a conscience. So let's have a little bit of a discussion about that. This will not be a long program. It's a concluding episode to the series we've been having here. But a mature conscience is very much like a parent inside of you. It's more than just our superego, that aspect of our psyche that has internalized all the moral precepts to which we have been exposed and which we may have incorporated into ourselves. It's more like a compass that guides us through our life. And a mature conscience is like the most loving, wise parent that tells us basically, you know, this seems really, really nice. This seems really appealing. This may bring you some immediate pleasure, but you know what? In the long run, it's not really good for you. You need to stay away from it. Not only that, you need to stay away from all those people, places, and situations that might lead you to incrementally, slowly fall into the trap. For example, if you've had a problem with intimate relationship fidelity and you've gotten into the habit of brief, titillating, emotional and or physical affairs that do something for you, but also impair your ability to deepen and solidify a more intimate, permanent relationship with your partner. If you had a problem there, probably not a good idea to be hanging out with friends who like to engage in behaviors that will lead you down a poor path. Probably not wise to go with them to certain places and attend certain events that will tempt you or that will present too much opportunity. So a mature conscience is that inner voice that tells you, basically, this seems appealing, but in the long run, it's not going to be good for you. It's not going to help you develop the kind of mature relationships you are really hungry for, and that will be much more satisfying than the immediately satisfying in the long run. And a mature conscience is also like the parent who pushes you, stretches you, wants you to build endurance, wants you to bear with the uncomfortable for longer term gain, that urges you to hang in there, even when things get very tough and you feel like throwing in the towel or you feel like quitting. And there's a part of you that says, I don't need this. This is just too much grief. I don't care to bear it. Sometimes the wise and mature conscience, like a wise, mature guide or parent, says, you know what? In the long run, there's something for you here. There's some benefit to this pain you're going through. So, for example, you hit a rough spot in a relationship. You're not seeing eye to eye anymore. Communication becomes difficult. Some competing concerns get in the way of the kind of intimacy you once enjoyed. You start to experience headache. It seems unnecessary. You begin to ask yourself, why do I need such grief in my life? And you think about maybe throwing in the towel because it's just become too unpleasant. When in fact, you could learn an awful lot more about the nature of real love. You could learn an awful lot more about tolerance, empathy, sincere regard for another human being, the value of commitment. You could learn so many other things if you had the mind to hang in there. Now, as most of you know or are familiar with my work or have heard prior podcasts, I am not advocating remaining in abusive, truly abusive relationships. It's not loving to subject oneself to abuse. But sometimes it's in our best interest to endure hardship. So because developing a sound conscience is much like installing a good internal parent, it's worth discussing what can go wrong with this process. And unfortunately, in our day and time, there's a good deal of insufficient modeling by parents and other caretakers. Too many times, parents are either absent or emotionally absent. They can be physically unavailable. They can be emotionally unavailable. Many times, especially in a single parent family, one person is stressed to the max and can't be as available as they might like to be. Sometimes the modeling is simply insufficient. There's a lack of proper modeling, perhaps even there's poor modeling. Perhaps there's the modeling of all the wrong types of behavior. A lot of things can go wrong these days when it comes to installing the kind of internal parent that we need to push us to do the unpleasant when we really need to, and to keep us from doing the appealing when we probably shouldn't. And then, of course, there's the issue of our own makeup and our own predispositions. Some young people are just naturally willful, more tenacious in temperament, more aggressive in personality style, and they tend to resist any boundaries and limits placed on their behavior and on their wishes. They tend to fight against the socialization process, if you will. And then there are those really unfortunate circumstances where in a dysfunctional family system, the child ends up being one of the more functional persons in the system. They have much more going for themselves, and they have much more together than their supposed mentors do. And they get the feeling that there's really no need for them to take a cue from their mentors. These folks can have a very difficult time installing the kind of internal parent that will guide them well through life. So we have a situation these days where all too many folks have insufficient internal moral compasses to push them to do the unpleasant when they need to, and to keep them from doing the seemingly appealing even when they shouldn't. When you add that to the fact that we have a culture that is so permissive, so morally relativistic, and so indulgent, especially that's a problem, so indulgent, we have so much, we expect so much, and we expect it immediately. We don't expect to have to face hardship. If something displeases us, we expect it removed right away. When you add those factors of our culture into the mix, it's harder than ever to incorporate within ourselves that kind of internal guide that we need to help direct us in life. That's the situation that we're in. And that's what makes this commandment that I've been talking about so imperative, so pivotal. Now, later in life, if we haven't already developed the kind of internal moral guide that we need, it's extremely difficult later in life to incorporate it, but it's not impossible. What's really necessary is for us to act in a manner that we have come to appreciate a wise and loving parent would urge that we act, and to reinforce ourselves for the effort to do so. It takes time and sustained effort. But even folks with impaired consciences can grow healthier ones if they really work at it. Now, there are those, I will admit, and we know very well, there are those individuals who are set in their ways to such an extent and who have such traits in their character that make it virtually impossible to undertake this task successfully in middle age or later. So I'm not offering a great deal of hope here for those individuals with character disturbances that are significant and that have traits in their personality that make this kind of new learning that I'm talking about possible. But it is not 100% hopeless. And for that reason, among other reasons, I'm vigorously trying to complete this book and advocate these commandments that can help anyone grow in character if they have a mind to. Certainly the chances are better when we're younger and we're more malleable and we're more adaptable and we're more amenable, we're more open. It gets harder as we get older and set in our ways. And as we experience a lot of reinforcement for our ways of seeing and doing things. And as we grow comfortable with our preferred ways of seeing and doing things. And if things seem to be genuinely working for us, if at least it appears like things are working for us, we have little motivation to change things. Besides, change involves effort. It involves work. It's hard. And we are creatures of economy. We don't really like to work unless we can see a payoff. And especially we want fairly immediate payoffs. The kind of work that I'm talking about here is hard work, requires sustained efforts, and the payoffs are long-term. They don't occur right away. And they're not big ones right away. So you have to have a heart for something bigger, which is what makes embracing all the other commandments that I've been talking about so important. First of all, you have to see the bigger picture. And secondly, you have to be of a mind to embrace that bigger picture, to pay it some reverence, to think outside of yourself, to get beyond your inherent egocentricity and appreciate that there's something more, something bigger to serve. Then you have to get a right head about you. You have to develop a profound reverence for the truth and all the other things that I've been talking about. You have to do all that before you can even develop the heart and the mindset necessary to think about growing a stronger, more rightly purposed conscience. Still, it's not impossible. I know that the task seems impossible, especially when we're talking about a person who already has significant character deficiencies, has traits in their innate makeup that make it a daunting task in the first place, and who have little motivation to change. In those cases, things are next to impossible. But I know many individuals who have come to a place in their life, sometimes in their late 50s, 60s, sometimes in their 70s, where they realize very clearly that something desperately needs to change. And it's for those folks, as well as for the young and impressionable among us, that I've been laboring over this book, and I'll have more to say about it as we move into a discussion of a brand new commandment on the next edition of the New Character Matters. Visit my blog at drgeorgesimon.com. That's drgeorgesimon.com. Avail yourself of the hundreds of articles and also avail yourself of my books, In Sheep's Clothing, Understanding and Dealing with Manipulative People, my comprehensive work, Character Disturbance, the Phenomenon of Our Age, the Judas Syndrome, and How Did We End Up Here? The Guide to Surviving and Thriving in This Character-Disturbed World of Ours, how to pick up the pieces, how to help ensure that you don't succumb to some of the same pitfalls in the future that have caused you such heartache in the past. And also my Spanish language edition of my internationally best-selling book, In Sheep's Clothing, all available on Amazon. So once again, thanks for tuning in. I'm Dr. George Simon. See you next time on the next edition of the New Character Matters as we begin talking about the sixth commandment of good character. Until then, thanks for tuning in. Take care.